Hi, I'm Wyatt Cash with Scoop News Group, and we're here at FedTalks with Roopa Vasan, research scientist at Leidos. Roopa, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start by asking, how, from your perspective, has technology in federal government played a critical role in 2020 in response to the unprecedented pandemic that has really rocked the nation?
Yeah, from my perspective, the federal government has addressed three critical areas, which is the detection of COVID, mitigation, and also, when approved, the distribution of the vaccine. And so when we start to look at the types of information that's out there, there's plenty of data and there's analytics that can be done on data, which is part of what the federal government has motivated to help monitor and limit the spread of COVID. So through the partnerships of academia, through industry, we're starting to see science at play. Basically in March, we had guidelines from the CDC that it went in with a set of heuristics that they thought would help monitor and limit the spread of COVID-19. But as we see through these partnerships and the research and development, these protocols have been refined. We have better information in terms of how to detect COVID and also how to treat patients with COVID. And that's really an interesting observation to see from a science perspective, how that kind of evolved over time. But now we're coming across a place where we're looking at the distribution of a potential vaccine. And there's a lot of operations management that goes behind that. Leidos was part of Project Cura in 2017, where they had doctors or nurses in Liberia trying to do distribution of medical equipment and supplies for the Ebola outbreak. And that kind of experience, and again, through the partnerships with industry, the government has an advantage here to help kind of provide the seamless integration of the vaccine to the most vulnerable population.
Well, how can the federal government potentially leapfrog ahead in using modern and emerging technologies like cloud, AI, and automation in some of the areas you just discussed?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. With my work that I've done with the government, each agency has a different set of goals, and they're starting from a different place. The intelligence community, the Department of Defense, they have been forward-leaning in the sense that they have, for example, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Committee, where they're developing frameworks and products and research within the area of AI. And the IC community has done a great job with partnering with industry from Silicon Valley to the folks here in DC on trying to enable AI technologies and implement that. But Leidos has also worked with agencies that are looking to digitize their thousands and thousands of papers. So before we can start to talk about cloud computing, we really have to figure out a process to get their papers into a digital format. So what I would say is it really depends on which agency you're working with, what their goals are, and then what that relative definition of modern is to them.
And another question is, how is the federal government, from your perspective, working in potentially new or creative ways to bring in talented technologists and data scientists, et cetera, into its workforce?
It's a really interesting question, and one that's come up in a lot of different panels and forums. I understand that the competition is pretty high. I'm a research scientist that works in the artificial intelligence domain. Having said that, there's meaningful work and framing that work to a general audience in terms of the level of impact that can be made is really important. There is research that's happening on clean energy right now related to climate change. It's a hot topic and one that needs a lot of attention. There's also, and including myself, research and scientists that have worked in cancer research, which can be it kind of gives you an opportunity to kind of flex your technical insight into an area which would be very beneficial. At the same time, we also have the NASA Lunar lander, which is in the works. So we're going to have the first human landing system where they're trying to land the first woman on the moon by 2024. That's a pretty neat project to work on. So when we start to look at the types of projects and the breadth of research and development all the way into integration and deployment of a piece of hardware, there's so much there for a scientist, an engineer, or a technologist to be a part of. In addition to that, we have software factories that the government has been setting up pretty close to universities where they have these fast-paced environments that's enabling collaboration and adopting different types of contemporary technology into a framework, into a product, and that just gives more opportunity for folks to be a part of it.
Well, lastly, what other trends or priorities do you have on your radar as we head into 2021?
Yes, there's so many out there. Just kind of querying my own group that I work for within the Leidos AI Accelerator. We're looking at ideas from explainability and trust in automation and AI automation, all the way to specialized hardware that can host AI algorithms in an efficient manner, to quantum computing. So some of the work that we've been doing in trust and automation looks at fairness, looks at interpretability, because we work in areas that have, high risk applications. So for example, our health sector, if they were to look at some of our work, they would like to understand, how can I trust the insights and the decisions that you made? Because this diagnosis is a really impactful place to be in for a particular patient. So that's what enables us to want to go and kind of lean into that area and try to understand what we can do to help bring a level of interpretation to AI. As well as we've been doing homomorphic encryption. That's another research thread, and they've been finding some really interesting ties to quantum computing. The NIST has put out some guidelines related to quantum resistance, and there are some interesting pieces that we can connect there.
Well, Roopa Vasan, thank you so much for taking time to join us here at FedTalks and sharing some of your insights with our audience.
Thank you for having me.